certificates and electronic logbooks Amendment Bill 2023.
This Council resumed the second reading debate on the Development, Town Planning, Lands and Works Miscellaneous Amendments Bill 2022. Honourable Mrs. Regina Yip, Chairman of Bills Committee on the bill, will first address the Council on the committee's report. Honourable Mrs. Regina Yip. President, as the Chairman of the Bills Committee on Development, Town Planning, Lands and Works Miscellaneous Amendments Bill 2022, I now report on the highlights of the Bills Committee's deliberations. The bill seeks to amend 6 ordinances related to development to speed up land development. These ordinances include the Town Planning Ordinance, the Land Resumption Ordinance, the Land Acquisition Possessory Title Ordinance, the Foreshore and Seabed Reclamations Ordinance, the Roads, Works, Use and Compensation Ordinance, and the Railways Ordinance. The Bills Committee held a total of 13 meetings with the administration. At one meeting, we spent 6 hours to listen to 50 deputations which made oral submissions. Members of the Bills Committee generally supported the proposal in the bill on amending the Town Planning Ordinance to streamline the statutory plan-making process. The bill proposes keeping the procedure of inviting public representation so that the public could make representation on draft plans, but dropping the procedure for inviting comments on representations and further representations. In other words, there will be 1 round of public consultation instead of 3. Members are of the view that the public should be given the chance to make further representations on the Town Planning Board's proposed amendments. The government explained the bill will remove the procedure of inviting comments on representation and further representations. This would shorten the plan-making process from up to 17 months to roughly 9 months. After considering the Bills Committee's views, the government would remove an amendment to bring back the procedure of inviting further representations. On representatives attending Town Planning Board meetings, the bill states that a representative who is a natural person has to attend Town Planning Board meetings in person unless the Town Planning Board is satisfied that there are exceptional circumstances. Members of the Bills Committee were concerned whether this proposal would deprive a representative of the chance to be heard. Members argued that a representative should have the right to be represented by a professional out of fairness. They asked the government to consider representatives' old age or inarticulacy as reasons for having someone else accompany the representative at Town Planning Board meetings and make an oral representation on their behalf. This is to safeguard the representative's right to state their case. The government said it fully respected the right of a representative to be heard, yet to plug the loophole of authorized attendance at Town Planning Board hearings, the government encouraged representatives to attend those meetings in person as much as possible. The Town Planning Board would draw up administrative guidelines to set out the circumstances in which a representative could authorize a representative to attend a hearing on his behalf or to accompany the representative at a hearing. The bill proposes empowering the Secretary for Development to designate an area as a regulated area, to protect that place from environmental degradation and to promote conservation. Some members argue the wording promoting conservation in the provisions was too vague, a problem which might give the Secretary unfettered power to designate regulated areas, holding back the development of those areas. In light of members' concerns, the government would move amendments to rephrase promoting conservation as natural conservation to better reflect the policy intent behind the provisions. on amending the Land Resumption Ordinance and the Land Acquisition Possessory Title Ordinance. The bill proposes allowing the government to use land acquired or resumed for any temporary purpose or for another permanent public purpose. Members were concerned this would give the government too much power by enabling it to take back the land before using the site for other purposes. The Bills Committee asked the government to clarify whether such a provision was consistent with the protection for private properties under Articles 6 and 105 of the Basic Law. The government also said it would be rare to put a site to an alternative permanent use. This, some members argued, meant it was unnecessary for the government to introduce such a contentious provision. The government replied it noted the concerns of the Bills Committee and the public and confirmed that the provision was in line with Articles 6 and 105 of Basic Law. Nevertheless, the government agreed it would not bring in a mechanism questioned by many just to cater for rare scenario. Therefore, the government would move an amendment to remove the provision on using resumed land for an alternative permanent public purpose. The bill proposes empowering the government to use resumed land for temporary purposes. Members generally took the view that the government should put in place internal control restraining departments in exercising this power. Examples included setting time limits and having senior officials, such as secretaries of bureaus, approving such requests to reflect accountability. The government adopted the Bills Committee's comments by pledging to devise administrative guidelines on the exercise of such power by government departments. Specific rules included limiting the temporary use to no more than 3 years under the first approval, which will be given by a deputy secretary of a bureau or a deputy director of the department involved. Each extension would be for no more than 2 years and requiring an approval from the top officials, meaning the permanent secretaries or directors of the bureaus or departments involved. The government said the administrative guidelines will be made public for people to monitor the process. The Bills Committee noted the government decision against setting an overall time limit was based on the reason that a one-size-fits-all approach will leave sites idled upon the expiry of the time limit when the project to implement the public purpose took a long time. The bill proposes a change to the interest rate payable on outstanding compensation for land resumption by replacing the lowest of the interest rates paid on deposit at 24-hour call by note-issuing banks, now at 0.01% per annum, with the 1-month Hong Kong dollar interest settlement rate, the Hong Kong Interbank Offer Rate, or HIBOR, published by the Hong Kong Association of Banks. Some members pointed out it was impossible for individuals or firms to obtain loans at HIBOR. They urged the government to follow the rulings of the Lands Tribunal by setting the interest rate at a prime rate plus 1%, that is a P plus 1. Members were also concerned the time-consuming title checks will lead to delays in compensation reaching the original landowners after the land ownership reverted to the government. On this issue, members urged the Lands Department to speed up the payment of compensation and offer a performance pledge on the processing time. The government explained that the bill would bump up the interest rate payable from 0.01% now to 3% or so per annum, a level comparable to that of short-term time deposits on the market now. The government said the proposal struck a balance between reasonable compensation for people affected and reasonable use of public money to speed up the payment of compensation so as to minimize the impact on landowners. The Lands Department is working on ways to enhance title checks. including devising open practice directions and setting target timeframes for key workflows. Foreshore and Seabed Reclamations Ordinance. On amending the Foreshore and Seabed Reclamation Ordinance, the bill proposes empowering the government to approve reclamation works before drawing up an outline zoning plan under the town planning ordinance. Members were concerned whether this proposal was justified. Other members stated that as technology drove rapid social changes, an evolving social landscape may warrant changes in the future land use. Mandating detailed land use before implementing reclamation may end up holding back land development. There was a suggestion from members that we should follow Singapore's example by adopting the concept of white zones in planning as a way to build up land reserve. This would give the government greater flexibility in deciding on the use of the reclaimed land in response to social needs. The government explained it was a long-standing administrative practice to prepare detailed land use plans before gazetting a reclamation project. This practice may delay the start of reclamation and land supply. The government provided ample justifications for the need and scope of reclamation in the land use proposals prepared for the planning and engineering studies of a project. That's why the government believed there was no need to wait for the completion of the statutory plan-making process before starting the statutory procedure for reclamation. Besides, all reclamation projects will still have to go through the statutory process of handling objections under the Foreshore and Seabed Reclamation Ordinance and require the Chief Executive in Council's approval before they could start. The bill proposes minor works mechanism under the Foreshore and Seabed Reclamations Ordinance. Some members suggested adding piers to the list of items under minor works in the schedule to the ordinance. Doing so could speed up the implementation of improvement works on the existing piers of remote areas to meet people's needs. In response, the government adopted this idea by moving an amendment. The bill, if passed, would benefit the pier improvement program to start in the next 2 years for some outlying island piers. Roads, Works, Use and Compensation Ordinance and the Railways Ordinance. The bill proposes expanding the current definition of minor works under the Roads, Works, Use and Compensation Ordinance and the Railways Ordinance. Members are worried whether the government would exploit this system by splitting projects to bypass the statutory gazettal procedure, stripping the public of the chance to lodge objections to the works. The government explained that the minor works were part of the current laws. Works Department have followed the statutory mechanisms to take forward projects. There was no deliberate splitting of projects to bypass gazettal. In terms of cost effectiveness, it would not make sense for a department to split a project on purpose either. The Bills Committee believed the government should streamline not just the statutory procedures about development under the bill, but should also streamline its internal administrative procedures. Officials should show a greater sense of responsibility in vetting development projects to speed up land development. Departments should rein in bureaucracy, improve internal coordination, and set key performance indicators to speed up approval processes. Members have focused on how LegCo could keep track of the government's efforts to streamline administrative procedures. In response, the government promised to brief the relevant LegCo panels on the progress of streamlining administrative procedures related to development. To swiftly take forward the proposals about speeding up land development under the bill, the government offered to move an amendment to designate the 1st of September 2023 as the commencement date of the bill upon its passage. the Bills Committee concurred. President, the foregoing is the report I make on behalf of the Bills Committee, and now I would like to make some personal comments. There were 15 members on the committee, including Mr. Tony Chair, the Deputy Chairman. On this bill, I believe after you have heard my report, it's rather complicated. And the attendance rate was very high, although we spent a lot of time on deliberations. Some meetings lasted until 8:30 p.m., and some meetings are whole day meetings. I thank the participation of members, and I also thank the Development Bureau for accepting many of our suggestions. And they will be moving some amendments on behalf of the administration. So members will not be moving any CSAs. I would like to thank Mr. Doris Holt, and also the Principal Assistant Secretary in her team. Almost all of them are female officers. Well, they were very knowledgeable about the contents of the bill and had ably assisted the work of the Bills Committee. I also would like to thank the Secretariat staff for preparing the documents and trying to get timely responses and replies from the administration. I believe this time the administration has done a lot to streamline the development procedures, as I have just reported. Under the existing framework, development is a very long process. Chairman, the amendments to these ordinances will be important for the development of Northern Metropolis. Although the time required is still very long after the streamlining procedures. This is a plan showing the development in the Northern Metropolis. We are told by the Development Bureau that a lot of land will be resumed to promote the innovation and technology, to set up the 17 technopole, and to expand the loop area and this Inno Park in the Northern NT. I would like to thank Mr. Wick Chow, the Commissioner, the Director for the Northern Metropolis Development, and we will only see in 2024 the development in those sites of Brown, and 2026 the Inno Park will be up and running. So we still need to work even harder to speed up all the processes, apart from streamlining the laws and the procedures. Members of the Bills Committee also asked the government to coordinate the processes more efficiently. I thank all the undertakings made by the Bureau in that they will be reporting back to us on the progress. So I'm grateful for their cooperation so that we could complete the scrutiny of this very complicated bill in just a few months. With these remarks, I would like to say I support the resumption and the second and third reading of this bill.
Misc.Amend Can. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I speak in support of the passage of the Development, Town Planning, Lands and Works Miscellaneous Amendments Bill 2022. That is the bill, in short. Now, in the 2022 policy address, the Chief Executive mentioned that we must streamline and shorten statutory time limits and enhance efficiency. That is to enhance the time required to turn primitive land into spade-ready land. Now, last year, the Development Bureau announced the plan to amend the legislation covering six primary ordinances covering town planning, lands resumption, acquisition, reclamation, roads, and railways. This is a bit to enhance the speed of land creation to meet the demand for housing. Now, 13 meetings have been held, and we have listened to dozens of representative bodies. Now, I thank the chairman, Mrs. Regina Ip, for allowing us ample time to put questions to the government, and we urge the government to respond carefully to the views. Now, under the leadership of the Secretary and the PAS, they present to us a very complicated plan in a simple way with visual aids. It helps us understand the bill, and it is something that other bureaus should learn. Now, town planning procedures, including works, planning, and development, should. I will speak in this order as well. Now, first about town planning. It involves amendments to Town Planning Ordinance Cap 131. The government proposed shortening the plan-making process from 2+9 to 2+5 months to reduce repetitive procedures and enhance efficiency. Now, some members were concerned that by compressing 3 rounds of representations to 2 rounds, it would reduce the opportunity for the public to speak. Now, I'm more concerned about how we can make good use of the 2 rounds of representations. I think the government's plan has struck a balance between developments and public views. Now, I will put forward my views later at the CSA stage. Now, I thank the government for introducing the partial plan-making procedures, requesting representatives to appear in person, and also setting a time limit for the time to speak. And also, under special circumstances, representatives can authorize other persons to appear on behalf. This will prevent the situations where the same representative can speak multiple times. Now, through administrative procedures, those with needs can also be accompanied by others in appearance in the public hearing. Now, in the past, for Section 12A applications, some people who were not in relation to land developments can also undermine land developments through Section 12A applications. Now, I welcome that under the bill, applicants under Section 12A must be owner of the land or a person who owns part of the land. Now, the enforcement will also be enhanced under the bill. Areas will be designated as regulated areas so as to more effectively protect rural areas with high ecological value and subject to development pressure and risk of degradation. Now, about land resumption. A lot of discussion focused on whether the amendments is in line with the basic law. Now, the DOJ and the Development Bureau says that it is in line with Article 6, 11, and 105 concerning protection of private properties. Article 6 stipulates that Article 11 says that no law enacted by the legislature of the HKSAR shall contravene the basic law. Now, the legal advisors of the government and the DOJ and the electrical have confirmed that the law will not be in contravention of the basic law. Now, before governments designate a land resumed for other purpose, that they can designate the land for an alternative public purpose. Now, compensation would have been given to landowners. Now, the reversed land would be, the title of the land would be reversed to the government. Now, it is not in contravention of Article 6 and 105 of the Basic Law concerning protection on private property. Now, concerning the alternative public purpose provision, I request the government that the government must specify the relevant government officials and departments. They must be of a certain grade to ensure that they will designate these alternative public purpose appropriately, and also there should be more transparency. Now, to implement some 30 amendments under the bill and also the administrative procedures, the government will issue guidelines with 2 involving land resumption. I welcome the time limit of 2 + 5 months concerning land resumption. Objecting views must be put forward by landowner or land occupiers of the affected land. And also the government specifies that objecting views on the ground of settlement should not be received under this mechanism, but dealt with under other arrangements. Now, welcome the government specifying that land resumptions and other development procedures can be conducted in parallel. Say, for example, after land resumption, compensation can be released immediately and rather than waiting for the authorization of expenditure. Now, I welcome that the government does not have to wait for the completion of all Pt1 amendments and then before gazetting reclamation in foreshore and seabed. Now, about roads and also railways ordinance amendments, it has been covered by the chairman. I will not repeat them. Now, about internal procedures and statutory procedures, I want to talk about the relationship between the two. Now, this amendment exercise focuses on statutory procedures. In the public hearings, some professional bodies describe statutory bodies as downstream procedures. I beg to differ. Now, they mean that internal decisions and internal procedures within the government are upstream and middle-stream procedures. Well, I think we have to compress administrative and internal procedures as well, so as to align with the CE's targets to speed up plan-making process. Now, at the last meeting, the government has identified some 30 provisions requiring guidelines as well as practical notes. I welcome that. And on the Legislative Council's role to monitor the government says that streamlining plan-making procedures is their priority, and they are now reviewing other aspects. In year 2023, and more proposals will be put forward to the Legislative Council. Now, land development is crucial in terms of developing the city and enhancing livelihood. Now, in the 2022 policy address, the chief executive puts forward 4 strategies. Now, enhancing efficiency and speed is related to plan making and land development procedures. Now, this is an important step for us to create more land to meet people's aspiration for better housing. I also submit I support the bill, and I also urge members to support the bill. Mr. Chen Kin-po. Thank you. I speak in support of the amendment bill. Now, housing has always troubled Hong Kong people. Expensive housing prevents young people from having a home. It causes grievances in society. The new term of the government has been acting upon this problem. Housing has been built. Now the government is also speeding up the supply of land from the source to enhance the supply of housing. I admire this determination. Now, in 2018, the government put forward the land debate to identify solutions for the land problem. Now, Mr. Feng Xingzheng, the former editor of Ming Pao, told me that the major issue is the complexity of land development procedures. It is time-consuming and reducing the supply of land. Now, he compared primitive land as a flour and bread as housing. Now, the time for baking the bread has become longer. It shows that the machine is broken. Now, even if we have more flour, if the machine is still broken, we cannot bake more bread. Now, so I support streamlining the plan-making process. Now, our Hong Kong Foundation has conducted a survey that after 2000, land development time required for land development has doubled. Now, 2000 was a watershed. Now, before that, the 6 new towns only required 6 to 10 years time for first population intake. The average time was 7.5 years. Cheung Kwan 6 years, Tung Chung 7 years. This is including the time for building houses. Now, the 6 new development areas post-2000 required on an average of 17 years to build. Now, Kutong North, 16 years, Hong Shui Kiu, 17 years. Now, it shows that it is because of the more complicated land development procedures that more time will be required. Departments are working in silos and there are repetitive procedures. And there was also political factors. The opposition camp delayed the procedures and crippling the government. Now, the amendments bill will amend 6 ordinances, including the town planning ordinance, to streamline the procedures, shortening the time required for turning primitive lands to spade-ready lands from 6 to 4 years, and also from 13 to 7 years. Now, the procedures will be streamlined significantly, and repetitive procedures will be removed, and the governments can conduct developments in parallel. During the planning process, the governments can start dealing with land resumption and the objecting views, and also after land resumption, the governments can issue compensation rather than waiting for authorization of expenditure for the works. And before amendments to OZP, the government can get set reclamation projects to speed up the process by 9 months. I support the bid of the government to streamline procedures. I know the government has done a lot. The government is breaking the silo mindset of departments and deal with procedures simultaneously. Of course, there are controversies. For example, authorization of expenditure is not required before issuing compensation. Some say that the Finance Committee would be bypassed. However, we will still be the gatekeeper because we can still veto expenditure application. Now, we have a responsibility to cooperate to make sure that the government's administration is smooth. Now, the compensation and resettlement plans to be proposed by the government will have to be vetted by the LegCo, and members can raise questions to the government. We can still monitor the government. Now, there are views that we must also compress the internal administrative work within the government. Departments usually work in silos, and their work is slow. It has slowed down the progress of application approval. The Our Hong Kong Foundation also suggests that a high-level steering committee must be established to coordinate the departments. And I hope the Financial Secretary and the Chief Secretary for Administration can take up the leading role and compress the unnecessary work as much as possible. Now, with the government's efforts, we have seen much higher supply in the private housing market. Now, every year, some 19,000 flats have been completed in the private market. Now, in the next 5 years, every year we will have more than 31,000 public housing units built every year, double compared with 10 years ago. Waiting time for PRH will be reduced from 5.5 years on average to 4.5 years in 2026. Now, housing is the most deep-rooted issues in Hong Kong. It is people's pain. In the past, with the malignant opposition from the opposition party, it could not be addressed. Today, with patriots administering Hong Kong, we can meet people's aspiration and we can do what we say. We will be able to address the housing issues in the next few years. We can finally address the deep-rooted problem, and in the future, everyone will have a home. Thank you. Now, the Council will now adjourn. The CE exchange session will be conducted between 10 and 12 p.m. and the Council will resume after that.